Good afternoon. Today's daf yomi is Sanhedrin payoff. Sanhedrin 81. Today's daf is dedicated for Shemir for the Chayalim. That's all for the Shvalim and Yeshua for Am Yisrael and this Eis Tzara. The daf yomi is the daf yomi for Shabbos Parshas Zachor. The daf yomi tells us on the top of payoff from Aleph Mishan is Chayav V'Shtei Misos. Somebody is liable from the court for death twice. Got convicted not once but of a second crime. So bathed in. So then Nidum Chamura, then we're going to kill him with a more severe penalty. So too, Avar Averash and Chayav Shtei Misos. Let's say he violated one sin, and the upshot of this sin is that it falls into the category of two different types of death. We'll see what this means. The Gemara is going to explain it. Then we're going to give him the more severe penalty. Rabbi Yossi Omer Nidum Bezika Rishona Shevalav. We're going to judge him with the first punishment, with the first prohibition that he had, whichever was first. And we'll see what that means in the Gemara. So first we deal with the question that says if somebody is liable for two deaths, death by two different actions, then we're going to give him the more severe one. So the Gemara says, Pshita, that's obvious. Iskuri means to say once he commits the second penalty, which is a lesser sin, we're going to now reward him by lowering his punishment. It doesn't make sense. So it says Rava, no, we're talking about a specific circumstance. He violated a lesser sin, and the judgment was issued about this minor sin. And then he went ahead and he violated a more severe sin. So you might have thought, given the Ningmar Dino Averakala, since he was adjudicated for the lesser sin, therefore he was Gavra Katilahu. He's already a dead man, and so therefore we can't give him the more severe penalty. Kamashman, we can't. Even though we know that for a treifa you can't punish him, but this is going to be judged under the circumstances of what's called Biarta Aramikirbecha. Right. Tosus asked this question, how can you give him the more severe penalty? Isn't this Eidos that you can't impeach, which we saw earlier about a treifa? So Tosus asked this question. He says, no, we're talking about it here that the second sin happened in front of the court. And where there we said you will get rid of him because of Biartara. Or alternatively, we can do this because if the first ones will be impeached, then then the second testimony will take effect. And so therefore it's called Eidu Shatayachal Azima. Those are two answers Tosfos gives. So Rav Yosef Bar Chama, or the father or the brother of Rav Yosef Bar Chama, says from Rabbi Bar Nasan, Mina Mil Sadamar Rabbanon, how do we know this halacha that Mishan is Chayav Shtei Misos Bezin Nidum Mechamur? How do we know this idea that if you're liable for two deaths, give me this more severe one? So he says it's a verse from Ezekiel. The verse says that if there be a person who's a righteous man, Ben Parit Shofech Dam, gives birth to a rebellious child who spills blood, and then what is it? Ve'el ha'arim achal, and he goes up to the mountains to eat. That's Eishes Re'eu Timei. He violates his friend's wife, and he lifts up his eyes to the idols. So what does this verse mean? That refers to B'sayif. He's going to get execution, decapitation. This refers to H'ish. This refers to adultery with strangulation. Lifts up his eyes to idolatry. The skill that gets stoning. V'ksiv mos yumas damav bo. And then at the end of these verses, it says, Mos yumas damav bo. And that is a reference to, we know that that's a reference, Mos yumas damav bo, yeah, that's a reference to skila. The word, when it says damav bo, that's a reference to stoning. And so Ezekiel is teaching us that where you have multiple penalties, you give them the more severe one. So maybe all of them get stoning. And we can interpret the verse this way. That refers to Ben Sur or Mora, that refers to a rebellious child, which is stoning. The Beskila, maybe that refers to a betrothed maiden, Nara Murasa, which is also Skila. That could also refer to Zuavodas Kochavim. That also refers to idolatry, the Beskila. So the Gemara says, no, Imkain, my Kamashma and Yecheskel. Why would you Ezekiel's not teaching us anything. Ezekiel has to be teaching us halacha. The Gemara says, well, Dilma Torah Kamadr, maybe just reviewing the Torah. Gemara says no. Imkeni ba'alei ladure ki'echad adra Moshe Rabbeinu. No, he should have said it like Moshe. He shouldn't have said it just in these hints. So then the Gemara says, Darash Rav Bar Chanina, what about the fact that the verse says, he says, no, it doesn't mean that it's referring to, like we said above, that it refers to a person. Then we're talking about a case after that. This was a person who we said the murderous child did this, but let's say he gave birth to a righteous child. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that he didn't murder, but rather it means to say that he was so pious that he didn't rely upon the meritorious deeds of his father. And he didn't lift up his eyes to the idols. What does this mean? He didn't walk in an arrogant manner. He didn't violate his friend's wife. What does that mean? He didn't go into his friend's profession. So, what does that mean? That he didn't take from the charity box of the poor. So anyway, we see from here, and it says, Tzadiku chayo yachya. He's righteous and he will live. So these are the minor good deeds. They're like not the biggest good deeds in the world, but that's what the righteous person does. So Rav Gamliel reached this verse. Well, Rashi explains what these verses were doing here. That this is the end of the verse says the righteous person will live. It means to say he's a completely righteous person. And so it means to say if he doesn't do these, he's not tzaddik. He's not a tzaddik if he violated. It doesn't mean that if he doesn't do this, he's not a tzaddik. But it means to say that we have to interpret these verses in this manner, that these refer to things that we wouldn't necessarily associate with a tzaddik. When Rav Gamliel reached this verse, he used to cry, so he says, one who does all of these will get life in the world to come, and if he just does one of these, he won't. So Rabbi Akiva says, what are you talking about? When it says, do not become defiled with all these things, it doesn't mean to say, if you do all these sins, you're not going to get a reward. But if you just do one of them, it's okay. But if you do one of these things, it's sufficient. If you violated the sin, you do two sins at once, the rabbi said you get the more severe one. Rabbi Yossi says you get whichever one you came to first. So what are we talking about here? Tanya Kate said, I'm a Rabbi Yossi. Nido Mazika Rishon. What does that mean? So Habal Love Chamoso V'Nasas Esha says. So let's say you had a relationship with your mother-in-law. First she was your mother-in-law, and then she became a married woman. So Nido Mechamoso, you get punished for her being your mother-in-law, which is burning. Esha says, let's say she was married V'Nasas Chamoso, and then she became your mother-in-law. Nido Meisha says, she'll punish you as though she was a married woman. A strangulation. Okay, we judge her if she was your mother-in-law and then became a married woman. We judge her as your mother-in-law with burning, but we should also give her the punishment of a married woman. We should also give her a married woman. Because Rabbi Yossi himself admits that if you add on a prohibition, you get both. So Rava responds to Rav Ada Bar Ava, Amrlei Ada Bari. So he says, Ada, my son, as a way of expression of love, he says, betray Katli, you can't kill him twice. You have to only give him one or the other. So it says in the Mishnah, Mishalaka Vashana, somebody who does a sin where you get lashes and then he repeats it, Bezdin Machnisin Osolakipa. Bezdin puts him in a room where he dies, Machilon Ososor, and you feed him barley Kreso Mispakas, till his belly explodes. So the Gemara says, Misham the luck of a shana bez and konsen osolakipa, because he does a sin with lashes and you did another lashes, then you basically allow him to die. So we're talking about a severe lashes for a penalty where you get death from heaven kares. And once you do this twice, we put you in there and we're done with you. The Gabra Bar Katoliu, he's anyway going to die because he's getting death from heaven. And the Kruvi Udu Miskav Katle, but he just didn't die yet. Since he's basically abandoning his life, he's violating these prohibitions. The court makes him die quicker. So I'm like Rabbi Yaakov, so he says, so he says, that when we do this, when it's lashes for one sin, but if it's 2 or 3 sins, he's just tasting the prohibition. He's not abandoning his life so much. And it says Mishalak of Ashana. So we say from here that if he does it and repeats it, then the court sticks him into this room to die. So the reason why we don't do it until he does it twice is because once he does it twice, he's established himself that he's a chazaka to do sins. And so therefore we see that this presumptive status happens once you do it twice. But this is a dispute in Yevamos. Rebbe says it happens once you do it twice. But Shimon Gamliel says it happens once you do it 3 times. So is our Mishnah like Rebbe or our Mishnah like Rebbe Shimon Gamliel? So the Gemara says, Vishana, once he does it twice, we stick him into the room. Even though he didn't do it a 3rd time. Maybe it's not like Rebbe Shimon Gamliel. Rebbe Shimon Gamliel says 3 establishes the chazaka. So our Mishnah must not be like Rishbak. So Amar Avina, Filu Tamer Rebbe Shimon Gamliel, Kasavar Averos Machzikos. Rebbe Shimon Gamliel says, even though Rebbe Shimon Gamliel says it takes 3 times to require a chazaka, that's in general when you're doing things. But when it comes to a sin, that once you do it twice, that's enough to say you're entrenched in the sin. Meaning to say, Rebbe Shimon Gamliel says the chazaka happens 3 times, but what's the reason after you were given lashes twice, once you do it the 3rd time, that we're going to say that we put you in the kippah? Because the chazaka is not on the lashes, but on the fact that you did it 3 times. And the sin itself is what establishes the chazaka. So the Gemara says, let's challenge Ravina. We went in the Bryce, somebody violated sin that has lashes. Pam Rishona Ushnia Malkin. So the 1st and 2nd time we give you lashes, Vishlishis, Kotanot Kippah. We stick him into this room. Abba Omer, Af Bishlishis Malkin. So even the 3rd time we give him lashes. Pam Arvias Kotanot Kippah. The 4th time we stick him in the kippah. Malab the Kuyama Malkios Malchikos. Isn't there dispute here? Everybody says that lashes is what establishes the chazaka. But put to the Rabbi Shimon Gamliel again. Aren't they arguing about the dispute of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel? The Gemara says no. Kuliyama is Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Everybody says like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel that it's 3 times. The dispute is Marasavar Averos Machzikos and Marasavar Malchios Machzikos. Saying what establishes the chazaka? Is it the sin or the lashes? Gemara says V'adetanya Hisrabo V'shasa Kisrabo V'Hirkin Rosho. But what about the fact that we learned in the Brisa that if somebody warned him not to violate the sin, and he was quiet, and it says though he accepted it, or they warned him again and nodded his head. The 1st and 2nd time we warn him, but Shlishis we warn him for lashes, and Konsanosol Kippah, and we stick him in the room. Abba Shalom or Af Shlishis Masrimbo Revius Konsanosol Kippah. And the 4th time we stick him in. So Vahasam Malchus Leika. So there's no lashes. So it's clearly just the sins. But Micah Mifke, what's the dispute? So Amarava Bekipa Tzrichas Raknafli. Another argument whether in order to put him in the kippah, you need to give him a warning first. My kippah, what is this kippah? Amar Yehuda kippah is basically a high place, so the height of the person alone. You're basically sticking him in a place that's exactly his height, very narrow place. So where is kippah hinted to in the Torah? Amar Rish Lakish says to Moses Rashara. It's somebody who is established to be wicked, then you should give him a very bad death. We see somebody who's established as wicked, we put him to death. What does it mean in the verse in Koheles? A person does not know his time is like a fish caught on a hook. It's a bad trap. chaka. This is a hook of fish. Hahoring says the Mishnah. Hahoring nefesh lo be'edim. Let's say somebody kills somebody without witnesses. We bring him into this kippah. We feed him very small amounts of bread and water, and this is how he dies. Basically, a slow death. Minayadina, where do we know this from? How we punish him? Amarav ve'edus miuchedes. Meaning to say, there are obviously witnesses. How do we know that he did this death? How can we punish him? So he says there were witnesses, but each one was separated, meaning to say it was a technicality. One saw from one window, the other saw from the other window. And even though it's true, but since we need them to be together, that in order to testify, therefore, we're just going to say we're not going to let you off, but we'll put him into the kippah so we don't get more murders. Shmuel Amar Shalom Basra. No, he killed without warning first. So he's getting off on a technicality, but we don't let him get too far. Rav Chisda Amar Avimi could go into Iskachosh Bedikos. The witnesses they contradict each other, but on non-essential matters. But not on the essential questions. Because it's none. Like what is the bedika? That's the stems of the figs. Not an essential question. We feed him the small amount of bread and water. We're saying one time it says they feed him bread and a little bit of water. The other time it says they feed him barley until his belly breaks. Which is it? I'm Rav Sheshes. First, you give him bread and a little bit of water until his stomach shrinks, and then you feed him barley until his belly breaks. Okay, Agonev as a kasva, somebody who steals a utensil that was in the temple that was called a kasva. Kasva is, the Gemara is going to explain. Vamakal bakosim, if somebody curses God, Rahman al-San, with a magician's name, Abo Aramis, or a person who is he has relations with a non-Jewish woman publicly. Kanan Pogambo. We rise up, person is allowed to just be zealous for God and kill this person. Kohen Sheshimesh B'Tuma, and a Kohen who serves in a state of Tuma. Kohen who serves in a state of Tuma. Ein Achav HaKohanim Avinu So Beistin. His brothers, the Kohanim, don't bring him to the court. His brothers who are Kohanim take him out of to the courtyard, and they bash his head open with sticks. Zar Shashimesh b'mikdash, a non-Kohen who serves in the temple. Rabbi Kiva Omar b'chanek. Rabbi Kiva says he gets strangulation. He gets killed from heaven. What is this idea of the Kedah Pogambo? That they're allowed to do it only when they see the action, but afterwards, his death is not going to be handed over to the court. Afterwards, his death is that would not be the penalty. My kiss, Rav Yehuda Kui Sharis. It's a utensil that you use. Me'echor means the words that hint to v'lo yavo l'ros k'bolas hakodesh hamiz. A makal b'kos, same time of Yosef, yake kosim es kosmo. That's somebody who does magic. It says kosim will strike the kosmo rabbana v'tim Rabbi Mari says yakel kosim lo ulkono u'machno. Says the person says to his friend that kosim should kill him and his creator and somebody who does good for him, meaning he's cursing God. Okay, well, daf here. This is the daf for Shabbos. A big shekoyach.
Thank you.